As someone who was trying to write their first book, how big can the world be? Is there a limit? So here's the deal. You do not want to go too terribly broad with your world because you don't know what you're doing yet. You really need to hone in on your skills before you go on a bigger, grander scale because it can very easily get out of hand. You want to focus in on the story that you're telling. So you can have a big, broad world that you can later expand inside of your story, but don't go crazy with what you're doing because you need to focus on what you're writing. Tell the story you're trying to tell. You're not trying to tell 18 stories in one. You are not trying to tell an entire universe worth of stories. You can do spin-offs, you can do sequels, you can do all sorts of extra things later on, but you don't need to do it right now. So it can be a big, broad world in general, but you're focused on one area. One story, we're following one character. So be very, very clear about what affects them, what impacts them, how it's shaping the story, and keep it really tight. The key to a successful writer is the ability to keep the story tight. If you go off on a bunch of side trails, if you get distracted by other characters and other storylines and other worlds, that's a sign of a weak writer because we don't know where to look. We don't know what to follow. You're just throwing extra things in there. So be very clear and specific on who we're following and what storyline we're following. Just because we're following one character doesn't mean we need their entire lifespan. We are following a storyline within their story. You're telling part of their life. You're telling part of their life story. It's a story within their overall story, and the tighter you can keep it, the better, the stronger, and the more impactful your story is going to be. So you can have big, broad things around it that you can hint at, you can allude to, you can kind of mention some things, but keep everything else nice and tight inside of that story so we can very clearly follow that through line in your story and know exactly where we're going, where we've been, how things are working together, because then you're going to have to do less editing on the back end. If you've got a lot of loose, saggy things around your story, as we say, it's going to be really, really a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of work for you to tighten it up. So when you get into working with a developmental editor, they're going to toss out a bunch of stuff that you don't need if you have gone big and broad with things. So the more specific you can get, the more niche down, the more narrow, the more streamlined to the story you're telling you can be, the better and the more impactful your story will be, and the easier it's going to be to not only produce that story, but to sell that story and to make money off of that story and to be seen as a quality writer.